After my last speaking event, someone suggested that I start a podcast. Well, I eventually did. But I'm jumping too far ahead. Let me start from the beginning. I know, this is where I'm gonna get some yawns from my listeners. Anyway, at the time, I thought, yeah, why not? I've done 2 podcasts over the course of the past 5 years. Surely, starting another podcast would be like a cakewalk in the park, no? I thought, mic? Check. I've got 3, in fact. A beautiful blue Yeti mic in white. This is the original classic blue Yeti, which is quite massive if you ask me. A blue Yeti Nano in blue, and the third is the classic Samson Q2U, my first ever mic that I got when I started podcasting back in 2020. Headset? Well, I've got a couple of decent ones. A good old Philips, and then there's the Sennheiser and my Logitech gaming headphones. No concerns there. Ideas? Plenty. Too many to count, in fact. So, easy peasy, yeah? Let's just start. I've been thinking about this after having done a couple of episodes on Kailogue up to this point. Just wondering, how did this podcast even get going? It almost didn't, honestly, knowing how much I tend to overthink. I mean, what gets people to start a podcast versus retracting and then thinking, it's not for me? Admittedly, my first foray into podcasting wasn't even initiated by me. I was in a startup at the time doing program management, and one of the founders suggested that we go into podcasting to build on branding and generate new customer streams. We did, and it turned out to be a success. Then came the second one, and now number 3. And despite having 2 in the bag, it never really gets that much simpler with the subsequent ones. There's a shitload of things to consider, such as, relevance for one. And, what is relevance, you ask? If I talk about gaming, being such an avid gamer would say, that's simple, I have so much to talk about. But what exactly? Do I focus on first-person shooters, RPGs? What about if I went in another direction, such as knitting or antiquing? Or, as I'll quote from Batman Begins, which is the first time I even heard of such a term, spelunking. Every topic will have its own relevance. Also, how unique is your podcast? Well, let's be honest, it will never be truly unique. It's like considering the startup world. In the end, most, if not all of the ideas are already taken. You basically just use an idea, likely an existing one, that you are most comfortable with and you relate to really well, and then you just roll with it. But people care. I care. So is the topic interesting? Will what I say matter? Will people say my podcast sucks? And by the way, this is the inevitability of things, just because we are, human beings. We critique, sometimes very harshly, about X, Y, and Z. Anything under the sun. And then you think, idea confirmed. Great! Massive problem solved. Nope. Thought of a unique name for your podcast? Wrong. In all likelihood, someone else already thought of it, either as a podcast or the name of some YouTube channel or rando e-commerce website or something else. The title Kailogue wasn't even my first choice, even though I did have it on an old list from eons ago. Titles such as Thinking Out Loud or Coffee Chat with Kai all came into play. I mean, these aren't even unique by any means, but it made sense to what I was trying to accomplish with this podcast. If only the names weren't taken. Frustrated, I thought, God damn it, okay, I'll come up with 30 names. And then I researched each. Nearly 80% were taken up. Okay, admittedly, I'm not the most creative person in the world, so there's that. Anyway, after what seemed to be an eternity and a beard fully formed, and the name finally confirmed, I had to deal with actually registering the handles. Registering the handles, Spotify, YouTube, Patreon, blah blah blah, for me anyway, was potentially the most aggravating, I'll use a more positive word, challenging process of this podcast. Just because the name doesn't exist on a Google search doesn't mean it hasn't already been taken up on Gmail, on YouTube, or Instagram. Kailogue was taken up, for instance, on Gmail, so I had to use the handle kailogue.cast. For my podcast, fortunately, it didn't have to be so complex, so I just left it as Kailogue. Next comes the goddamn logo. What about the logo, you ask? The logo signifies you. It represents the uniqueness outside of your voice. To me, before starting this podcast, my mind was supremely fixated on this. I thought, this is the make or break. But I later realized that there were so many more items that were make or breaks. Everything else can get started, so long as the logo is just done. And then, it was done. Thank goodness for ChatGPT. I keyed in a couple of points, I used a photo of myself, and then I said, hey, create a logo for me. 3 iterations later, it was done. And then, did I start recording an episode? Nope. Now, when I say it's not just a get a mic, get a headset, and then speak sort of a thing, when it comes to podcasting, I don't mean it from the perspective of spend eternity thinking and thinking and thinking because you'll never get started. When I launched my first podcast back in 2020, there were maybe 1 million podcasts out there? Okay, this figure probably isn't that realistic, but the point is that there were a lot, even back then in 2020. Now, in 2025, there are probably at least 5 million or more. I mean, forget the numbers. Forget which podcasts are currently active versus inactive. You, as an individual, you want to create a podcast that actually matters. And hopefully, get some listeners. Otherwise, if at the end of the day, only your mother and doting grandmother subscribe and listen to your podcast religiously, then, well, as I continued on with this planning process and building the framework for this podcast, I realized that there were so many more things to consider. And then my program management and operational mindset went into overdrive. I created a Google Drive folder for this podcast, a folder dedicated to templates for episodes and for show notes, documents for my episode ideas list so that I can quickly jot down a bullet point if something interesting pops up in my head. I created a branding document so that I can store short and long summaries to use for my handles. I developed a prep sheet, which ended up being 6 pages long so that I don't have to stress about whether I miss any relevant steps whenever I create a script, record a show, and then do post-recording, and then finally post it online. Because to me, missing a step is massively annoying, a pet peeve. Next, I had to get my intro and outro recorded. I remembered writing an intro and outro spiel for my recordings, and then I thought, okay, can I use ChatGPT to refine it for me? And so I did. I thought, cool, the end product looks decent. Moments before launching my first podcast episode, which was called Time for Dialogue, I had these strange goosebumps as I reviewed the draft. Something about the intro and outro made me feel really weird. I searched the text online and I found out that ChatGPT literally copied and pasted bits of the intro and outro text from another podcaster. I confronted and wrote a super angry message to ChatGPT on this, and ChatGPT proceeded to blatantly deny it. It eventually, after much effort, admitted its mistakes. So fine, let's get on with it. I quickly scrapped the launch and I rewrote and then re-recorded the intro and outro spiels. Who would have thought launching a podcast could be so nerve-wracking? And then there's more. You don't just record, right? You have to consider the environment as well. Specifically, the location you are recording. My room, well, it faces a busy road, so there's constant traffic, barking dogs, and endless construction. I have to figure out the best ways to record with limited hassle. And no, for those who consider recording a podcast and thinking, well, I want the sound of nature to be in my background, birds trilling, wind rustling against the leaves. No, it doesn't really work like that, especially when you have that one damn sneaky crow squawking strategically every 7 seconds when you do your recording. And you can't chase it off because it's just hiding along some corner in the wall or in the tree or something. And you just can't find it for the life of you. So all these podcasts, they're recorded at night, late night, with coffee in hand. Of course, people will argue, Kai, it's not so difficult. You don't need a fancy mic. You just need to have a pair of mic-enabled earphones, attach the cable to the laptop, and then just make sure it's reasonably quiet, and then you hit record. Talk your heart out. There's truth in that. But the worrywarts like myself and others would hear this and debate to kingdom come on the insanity of it all. But still, there's truth in that. I remembered speaking to a fellow podcaster back in 2022. She created her own mental health podcast, a wonderful one. And we were having this podcast ideation session. I asked her, "What do you use to edit your podcast?" I said, "Well, I use Descript. My God, it's great for editing. I can get rid of all the ums, the ahs, the silly bits." She went, "Huh? Descript? What's that?" "I just use Anchor, man. I live record all of my episodes, attach my pre-recorded intro and outro to it, and then immediately post it online. I don't have, Kai, the mental capacity, much less the time, to edit the recording." And I remember just thinking at the time, you don't edit your podcast? Holy crap. I guess I am pretty OCD. I mentioned so much in this episode, and probably just made more people, those interested in starting a podcast, stressed out. Look, in the end, here's my 2 cents. You have to just ask yourself this. Why are you starting a podcast? If you have an idea, any idea, one that you truly believe in and have a genuine interest in, and of course, you don't need to be a career professional speaker to speak your mind, then you just start. You don't need a goddamn fancy mic. I'm poor as hell, and each time I bought any new mics, the Blue Yeti Nano, I had to sacrifice and eat ramen for lunch and dinner for a few weeks after. That is neither practical nor healthy. Frankly, a simple pair of mic-enabled earphones will suffice. A laptop, an internet connection, a free subscription to live record and post your podcast. And then you're golden. To my listeners, do you have an interesting idea that you want to share with the world? Do you want to start somewhere but you have concerns or worries? Feel free to reach out. I'd love to share more about my journey and support you on getting started.